When I got the letter taped to the old oak tree at the edge of my lot, I thought it was a prank. Notice of abandonment, it read in self-important block letters, complete with a fake seal from the Lakeview Homeowners Association. My name wasn't even spelled right. According to the notice, my property had been neglected, derelict, and subject to reclamation under HOA guidelines. I stood there in the fading light, reading it twice just to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. It was my lot, my quiet, grassy half-acre by the cul-de-sac, the one I'd been saving to build a small cabin on when I retired. I paid the taxes. I kept the grass mowed. The only thing abandoned about it was the HOA's sense of reality. I knew exactly who was behind it. Karen. Every neighborhood has one. Ours just happened to have the deluxe model, president of the HOA, owner of a white Lexus SUV she parked diagonally across 2 visitor spots, and self-proclaimed guardian of property values. She lived 3 houses down from my empty lot and had been obsessed with it since the day I bought it 2 years ago. I'd caught her pacing the edge with her phone camera, muttering about visual blight and community standards. She once even planted petunias along the boundary line, pretending she was beautifying the area, though we both knew it was a territorial claim. So when I saw her name stamped at the bottom of the notice, issued by HOA President Karen M. Dalton, I couldn't help but laugh. It wasn't the first time she'd overstepped, but declaring my property abandoned? That was new. I took the notice home, sat down with a cold drink, and started reading the HOA bylaws online. There was no clause about abandoned lots, at least, not one that applied to private, tax-paying landowners. My lot technically wasn't under the HOA's jurisdiction. The boundary line stopped 20 feet short of my property. Karen had tried to annex it last year during a map correction vote, but that stunt had failed miserably when the county clerk laughed her out of the zoning office. That night, I parked my truck at the edge of the lot and sat in the cab, headlights off, just watching. Around 10 p.m., Karen came strutting down the cul-de-sac in her robe and slippers, holding a flashlight like she was on a mission from God. She walked right onto my land and started sticking little pink survey flags into the ground, marking imaginary community property lines. I rolled my window down and said, "Hey Karen, those little flags don't make you queen of the dirt." She nearly jumped out of her skin. "Oh, I didn't see you there," she stammered, trying to sound official. "We've determined this lot is abandoned, so we're marking it for HOA maintenance." "Maintenance?" I asked. "You mean trespassing?" She sniffed. "The community can't tolerate unkept spaces. We're landscaping it for the good of the neighborhood." "You mean for the good of your ego," I said, starting the truck engine. "Karen, step off my property before I call the sheriff." Her face tightened into that brittle HOA smile that never reaches the eyes. "You'll regret this hostility. We have procedures." Then she turned and marched back home, robe fluttering like a cape. The next morning, the real fun began. A crew of teenagers in neon vests, probably hired from one of those community youth programs, showed up with rakes and leaf blowers, courtesy of Karen's beautification project. I intercepted them before they unloaded. "Sorry kids," I said. "This isn't HOA land." They looked confused. One called his supervisor, who called Karen, who arrived 5 minutes later like a general inspecting a battlefield. "Step aside, please," she said, waving her manicured hand. "This area has been deemed under HOA maintenance until ownership disputes are resolved." "There is no dispute," I replied. "I have the deed right here." She didn't even look. "You can't just own property and leave it vacant forever. It's an eyesore." "Then stop looking at it," I said. Her nostrils flared. "You're being unreasonable. This affects everyone's property values." I smiled. "Then maybe I should build something that raises them." Her expression changed. "Build? You can't build here. You'd need HOA approval." "I don't," I said, watching the color drain from her face. "Because this land isn't yours." That was the moment I decided exactly how to play this game. I wasn't going to file complaints or write angry letters. I'd seen how she worked. Bureaucracy was her weapon, so mine would be something she couldn't file away: action. For the next week, I quietly made calls. A local fencing company owed me a favor from when I helped them with some electrical work. They agreed to come out on a Saturday night, no questions asked. We'd bring in materials after dark and work until morning. A 6-foot cedar privacy fence, complete perimeter, nothing fancy, but tall enough that Karen couldn't see over it from her kitchen window. Friday evening, I noticed Karen hosting her usual HOA committee social on her driveway. A cluster of neighbors sipped wine while Karen held court, gesturing grandly toward my lot as if it were a moral stain on the cul-de-sac. I could hear snippets of her speech through the open window: community integrity, shared aesthetic, responsible ownership. The usual nonsense. At 9 p.m., the last SUV pulled away. By 9:30, the street was dark. I pulled my truck onto the lot, headlights covered with cardboard, and the fencing crew arrived in silence. 3 guys with power augers, stacks of cedar panels, and a generator muffled with a moving blanket. We worked under portable lights, drilling posts, setting panels, moving fast. The air smelled of sawdust and damp earth. I barely spoke except to hand tools or pour coffee. Every thud of the post driver felt like punctuation. Mine, mine, mine. Around 2 a.m., a porch light flicked on down the street. Karen's window glowed. For a moment I thought she'd come out yelling, but she didn't. Maybe she assumed we were county workers. Maybe she thought her intimidation tactics had worked. Either way, by sunrise, the fence was finished, a clean, straight line of golden cedar enclosing every inch of abandoned land. I stood there at dawn, hands on hips, admiring the work. It looked perfect. Not spiteful, not aggressive, just definitive. A physical boundary where none had existed, a message written in wood and nails: "This is mine, stay out." By 8 a.m., Karen's Lexus was parked at the curb, engine running, door half open like she'd leapt out mid-motion. She stormed up to the fence, face red, hair wild, holding her phone out like a weapon. "What is this?" she shouted. "You can't just. This violates multiple HOA codes." "Those don't apply here," I said, sipping coffee from my thermos. "But thanks for your concern." She pointed at the fence like it had personally insulted her. "It's unsightly. It blocks the view of the lake." "It blocks your view," I corrected. "Everyone else seems fine with it." She stomped her foot, literally stomped, and said, "I'm calling the county inspector. This fence is illegal." I shrugged. "Then I guess we'll see who's right." As she fumed, I noticed a few neighbors peeking through curtains, curious. Some looked amused. One guy gave me a thumbs up. Karen saw it too, and that only made her angrier. By noon, she'd called not 1 but 3 county departments, zoning, code enforcement, and public safety, claiming I'd built an unauthorized barrier on communal land. The first officer to show up was a young guy named Diaz, who took one look at my deed and said, "Ma'am, this lot is private property. He's within his rights." Karen's jaw dropped. But the HOA. "The HOA doesn't extend past Oak Ridge Drive," Diaz said flatly. "You've got no authority here." For once, she had no words. When the officer left, I leaned on the fence post and said quietly, "You know, Karen, if you'd just asked nicely, I might have built you a gate." Her eyes narrowed. "This isn't over," she hissed. Then she got in her Lexus, slammed the door, and peeled out of the cul-de-sac so fast she nearly took out her own mailbox. She was right, though. It wasn't over. Because by that evening, I saw her on the sidewalk again, clipboard in hand, whispering with neighbors and pointing toward my new fence. Whatever she was planning next, I could tell it was going to get messy. Karen didn't waste time licking her wounds. By Monday morning, I could feel her next move brewing. The HOA newsletter hit every doorstep, and right on the front page, beneath a stock photo of a smiling suburban family, was an article titled, community blight and the responsibility of property owners. The piece never mentioned my name, but it didn't have to. Vacant parcels that fall into neglect reflect poorly on our neighborhood and may attract pests or unsafe activity, it warned. The HOA urges all residents to report such properties for compliance review. There was even a photo, my fence cropped tight so it looked like a barricade in front of a wasteland. I almost laughed. It was such a predictable Karen move, weaponized perception. She couldn't fight me legally, so she was going to try and turn the neighbors against me. But that was fine. I had time, patience, and a plan forming that would make her regret ever poking the bear. When I pulled up that evening, Karen was already outside gardening near the sidewalk, which really meant pretending to prune her roses while watching my every move. I waved. She didn't wave back. Instead, she shouted, "You're getting mail from the HOA," and held up a sealed envelope like it was a summons from heaven. I walked over, and she immediately switched to a mock-sympathetic tone. "Listen, I know you're upset, but you've caused quite a stir. People are concerned. That fence, it's just so aggressive." "It's wood, Karen," I said. "It doesn't have feelings. It changes the whole character of the street," she pressed on. "And we can't have that without a vote." "Good thing you don't get to vote on my land," I replied. Her face twitched. "We'll see about that." I took the letter home. Inside was a formal request for review, stating that community members have expressed distress over non-compliant construction visible from public areas. The HOA demanded I submit fence plans for retroactive approval and provide proof of insurance and property intent. It was signed by Karen and 2 other board members, likely her loyal followers, the kind who would sign anything if she told them it was for property values. I called the county zoning office. They confirmed again, my lot wasn't within HOA jurisdiction. The fence was fully permitted under local code, no variance required. But the clerk chuckled when I read her the letter. "Sounds like you've got one of those HOA crusaders," she said. "Keep your paperwork handy. They tend to escalate." Escalate she did. The next morning, bright and early, a community inspection team showed up, 3 retirees in matching blue polo shirts with clipboards. They stood on the sidewalk, taking photos of my fence from every angle. One of them, a short man with a permanent frown, called out, "Sir, we're conducting a neighborhood assessment. This is routine." I walked up slowly. "Routine for property you don't own?" He looked uncomfortable. "We've received complaints." "From who?" He glanced toward Karen's house. Her blinds shifted. "Right," I said. "Well, you can take all the photos you want from the sidewalk. Step 1 foot past the curb and I'll call the sheriff for trespassing." They shuffled away soon after. By that afternoon, Karen was outside again, this time talking animatedly to a man in a beige county vehicle. From my porch, I couldn't hear the words, but I could read the body language. Karen waving arms, pointing at my fence. The county guy nodding, writing notes, looking bored. I decided to stroll over casually. "Afternoon," I said. "Beautiful day for some unsolicited advice?" Karen spun around, caught off guard. "Oh, we're just having a friendly discussion. The county is looking into your fence. There may be zoning inconsistencies." The inspector gave me a polite nod. She called us to check boundary lines. "Everything looks fine from our side." Karen blinked. But the view obstruction. "Not a code issue," he said. "As long as it's under 7 feet. He pointed at the fence. "This one's 6'2". Perfectly legal." He packed up and left. Karen stood there, mouth tight, watching him go. Then she turned to me, voice trembling with frustration. "You can't just hide behind laws. This neighborhood has standards." I smiled. "Then maybe your standards need a fence too." That line broke her. She stormed back inside. But I wasn't done. Her obsession with control was like oxygen, cut it off and she'd panic. So I decided to take it one step further. I called a local landscaping company and hired them to plant a line of fast-growing arborvitae trees along the inside of the fence. They'd reach 8 feet by summer, turning my eyesore into a lush green wall. When the crew showed up with saplings and shovels, Karen came running out again, phone in hand. "What are you doing now?" "Adding privacy," I said cheerfully. "You don't like seeing my fence?" "You won't have to." "This is harassment," she said, recording video. "It's photosynthesis," I replied. For a few weeks, things calmed down. I saw her occasionally glaring from her window, but no more letters, no more fake inspectors. I figured maybe she'd moved on. But Karen wasn't the move-on type. The next strike came in the form of a notice from the county tax office, a property reassessment request filed anonymously, alleging unreported improvements. Someone had tried to get my property taxes raised by claiming I'd built a structure. The county had to send an assessor to verify. I greeted the assessor with coffee and a smile. "Structure," he said, looking around. "This is a fence. Nothing taxable here." "I figured," I said. "Let me guess, complaint came from a neighbor?" He smirked. "You'd be surprised how many of those we get." When the reassessment failed, Karen changed tactic. She started hosting HOA cleanup events right outside my fence, inviting neighbors to beautify the public spaces adjacent to neglected lots. They'd pick up non-existent trash, sweep the sidewalk, and make pointed comments about how some people just don't respect the community. I kept my cool. I even joined one of the cleanup days. Showed up with gloves, garbage bags, and donuts for everyone. Karen froze when she saw me. "What are you doing here?" "Being neighborly," I said. "You said we're beautifying the area, right?" She forced a smile so tight it looked painful. "That's unexpected." I made sure to outwork every volunteer, raking, bagging, even trimming the grass near her driveway. When the event wrapped up, I thanked everyone for coming. "Karen, this was great," I said loudly enough for the crowd. "Let's do it again next month, maybe outside your place." Half the volunteers chuckled. Karen didn't. That evening, she put up a new sign near the cul-de-sac entrance. HOA territory, private grounds. It wasn't official. The HOA boundary still ended before my lot. But I recognized her pattern. If she couldn't win by law, she'd try to win by illusion. So I decided to remind her, and the whole neighborhood, what reality looked like. The following weekend, I hired a surveyor, an actual licensed one, to mark the official property lines. We used bright orange stakes and a small metal plaque that read, "Private Property Boundary, Verified by County Survey 2025. I placed one right at the corner where her petunia bed had started creeping across the line. She saw it within hours. "That's vandalism," she snapped. "It's geometry," I said. She threatened to sue. I told her to go ahead. She didn't. By now, the neighborhood was divided, half secretly cheering me on, half pretending to support Karen out of fear she'd turn on them next. One neighbor, Jeff, stopped by one evening and said, "You know, she's been talking about filing a community nuisance claim to force you to sell." "Let her try," I said. "I've got every permit, every receipt, every law on my side." Jeff grinned. "That's what makes it fun to watch." But Karen wasn't just talk. A week later, I found another envelope, this one from the HOA attorney. It accused me of willful obstruction of community views and failure to adhere to neighborhood harmony standards. It demanded I remove or lower my fence within 14 days. I laughed out loud reading it. Then I called my lawyer friend, Paul. He specialized in property law and owed me a favor. "Send me everything," he said. "I'll make it hurt." He drafted a single-page response citing trespass law, harassment statutes, and the HOA's lack of jurisdiction. At the bottom, he added a polite warning. Further attempts to interfere with my client's lawful enjoyment of his property will result in civil action. We mailed it certified. 2 days later, I saw Karen outside, pacing by her mailbox, letter in hand, face pale. For once, she didn't come over. She just glared at the fence, then at me, then back at the letter. That's when I knew I'd won the round. But something in her expression told me this wasn't over, not by a long shot. Because when a control freak like Karen feels cornered, she doesn't surrender. She detonates, and I had a feeling her next explosion was already ticking. By the next weekend, I realized Karen wasn't just plotting, she was regrouping. The woman operated like a small government agency, and I could almost see her gears turning behind those tinted Lexus windows. I'd humiliated her twice in public. Once when the county inspector cleared my fence, and again when my lawyer's letter shut down her fake legal threats. That kind of loss wasn't something she could digest quietly. For people like Karen, control wasn't about rules. It was about identity. Losing a fight meant losing herself. Sunday morning proved it. I was sipping coffee on my porch when I noticed 3 unfamiliar cars parked along the cul-de-sac. Out stepped Karen, wearing her HOA president badge like it was a sheriff's star, and 3 other people dressed in business casual. A man with a clipboard, a woman holding a folder, and another guy with a camera slung around his neck. They stood in front of my fence for several minutes, pointing, measuring with their hands, whispering. I recognized the game immediately: public theater. Karen was staging another inspection, this time with an audience that looked official enough to intimidate anyone watching from their windows. I strolled over, keeping my tone light. "Morning, Karen. Building a fence of your own?" She forced a smile, that fake, sugary kind that cracks at the edges. "We're conducting a compliance review. This property has generated numerous complaints about environmental impact and runoff hazards." "Runoff?" I said, half laughing. "It's grass and dirt." She pointed dramatically at the slight slope near the curb. "When you installed this fence, you altered drainage patterns. The community is worried about water pooling." I looked at the guy with the clipboard. "You with the county?" He shook his head quickly. "No, ma'am. HOA Environmental Subcommittee." I smirked. The subcommittee of make-believe." Karen's smile vanished. "You're mocking legitimate governance." "Karen," I said evenly, "you're standing on my property line with 3 strangers and a camera. If you don't leave in 30 seconds, I'll call the sheriff again." She hesitated, then turned to her team. "We're documenting this for our records. Let's move on." They retreated to the sidewalk, muttering, snapping a few more pictures. She wanted confrontation, but I wouldn't give her the satisfaction. That afternoon, a few neighbors wandered over, curious. Jeff chuckled. "She's calling herself an environmental crusader now? Next week she'll say I'm harboring endangered weeds," I said. But Jeff's wife looked uneasy. "She's telling people you blocked community access to the lake trail. Some folks are starting to believe her." That hit a nerve. The lake trail ran behind several properties, but my lot didn't block it. It stopped 50 feet short. Karen, however, had always referred to it as our shared path. Now she was spinning a story that my fence had sealed off public recreation space. I could already imagine the headlines in her next HOA bulletin. "Local resident erects barrier, denies community lake access." I wasn't going to wait for that fire to spread. The next morning, I called the county parks department. They confirmed what I already knew. The trail was on municipal land, not HOA property, and my fence didn't touch it. "You're fine," the park supervisor said. "We'll send a statement if needed." That gave me an idea. If Karen wanted a propaganda war, I'd give her one, but with actual facts. I designed a small, tasteful wooden sign for my fence facing the street. "Private property, county verified. No HOA jurisdiction beyond this point. Trail access remains open via Lakeview Path." The sign went up Tuesday morning. By lunchtime, Karen was outside pacing like she'd discovered graffiti on the Mona Lisa. "That sign is inflammatory," she yelled across the fence. "It's informational," I said. "You're undermining community cohesion." "I'm clarifying geography." Her voice climbed an octave. "You're mocking the HOA." "I'm quoting the county." She stood there trembling, fists balled, before finally storming off. 10 minutes later, I got an email from Lakeview HOA at community.org with the subject line "Official Notice of Defamation." I almost spit my coffee laughing. The body read, "Your signage misrepresents HOA authority and constitutes libelous communication." I replied with a one-line response, "Forward all future correspondence to my attorney." 2 days later, my attorney texted me, "She sent us a letterhead complaint full of grammar errors and screenshots of your fence." He added a laughing emoji. "She doesn't have a case," Paul said. "But I can send a cease and desist if you want." "No," I said. "Let's let her talk herself into a corner. Because that's exactly what she did." The more she pushed, the more ridiculous her claims became. Within a week, she'd filed a petition demanding the HOA assume management of my lot for community benefit. She circulated it door to door, telling people I was planning to build a storage facility or boat garage that would ruin the neighborhood aesthetic. Most people didn't sign. But a few did, her loyal circle, the ones who attended every meeting just to gossip and feel important. She managed to gather 12 signatures out of 40 homes. Enough to feel powerful, not enough to matter. I decided to crash her next HOA meeting. The gathering took place at the community clubhouse, a beige box of a building that smelled like air freshener and frustration. I arrived early, took a seat in the back, and waited. Karen strutted in wearing a floral blazer, clipboard tucked under her arm, and greeted everyone like a politician. When the meeting started, she cleared her throat dramatically. "Our first agenda item, the matter of the abandoned parcel on Lakeshore Drive." "Not abandoned," I said loudly. She froze, scanning the room until her eyes found me. "You're not a member of this HOA. Neither is my property, but that's never stopped you before," I said. Murmurs rippled through the room. She tried to recover. "As I was saying, this lot has created division within the community." I stood. "Division you caused. I pay taxes on that land. I maintain it. I built a fence fully permitted by the county. You have zero jurisdiction." She huffed. "We have community standards." "Then apply them inside your boundaries," I said. "Because the county's about to issue a statement confirming exactly where those end." At that, I pulled out a folded letter from the Parks Department, the same one verifying trail access and boundary lines, and read it aloud. The room went silent except for one man who muttered, "She's right." Karen's composure cracked. "You don't understand how HOAs work," she snapped. "This neighborhood thrives because of structure and accountability. Without that, property values collapse." "I think values drop faster when leadership lies," I said. The room went still again. Someone clapped. Then another. Karen's face flushed deep red. She grabbed her papers, muttered something about disrespect, and adjourned the meeting early. As I walked out, Jeff caught up to me. "That was legendary," he said, laughing. "You just nuked her campaign." But I wasn't celebrating yet. Karen's type doesn't quit after public humiliation, they rebrand. And sure enough, by Friday she'd pivoted. I woke up to find a new flyer taped to every mailbox. "Join the Lakeview Neighborhood Coalition." The flyer looked suspiciously like an HOA pamphlet but had different letterhead and a new slogan, "Because rules matter." It was Karen's attempt to start a shadow HOA, one with voluntary membership, that she could use to keep meddling. I ignored it, but she didn't ignore me. That evening, I caught her standing outside my fence again, phone camera raised, filming my property. "What now?" I called. "Documenting environmental degradation," she said without irony. "Karen, it's grass. Not Chernobyl." She didn't answer. Just walked away, muttering into her phone like she was narrating a documentary. The next morning, I discovered what she'd been recording for, a new post on the community Facebook group titled, "The Fence That Divided Lakeview." She'd uploaded photos of my property, and a long rant accusing me of destroying neighborhood harmony. But what she didn't expect were the comments. Within hours, dozens of neighbors were roasting her. "He owns the lot, Karen. It's a nice fence. Let the man live." Someone even made a meme, her pointing angrily at the fence, captioned, "When your HOA presidency doesn't include jurisdiction." It spread like wildfire. By the end of the day, the post had over 200 reactions, most of them laughing emojis. Karen deleted it that night. The silence that followed was almost suspicious. A full week passed with no letters, no crews, no flyers. I thought maybe she'd finally surrendered. Then one afternoon, while checking the lot, I noticed tire marks in the dirt, fresh ones leading to the center of the property. And right there, next to my fence, was a wooden stake with orange tape labeled Site Review. I bent down, reading the fine print. It wasn't from the HOA. It was from the County Development Office. Someone had filed a request to inspect potential future construction. My stomach sank. Karen had taken the nuclear route. She'd reported me for unauthorized building intentions, claiming I was preparing for unpermitted development. That meant county inspectors, soil testing, and possibly a temporary stop order on any improvements until it was cleared up. I called the number on the stake. The woman on the other end sounded apologetic. "Yeah, we got a complaint. Happens a lot with neighbor dispute. We'll check it out, but if it's false, she'll get fined for filing fraudulent reports." I smiled. That's the best news I've heard all week. I hung up and looked at the fence. Karen thought she could weaponize bureaucracy. She forgot that paper cuts go both ways. And now, it was my turn to file some paperwork of my own. The next morning, I walked into the county offices with a folder full of documents and a smile that could cut glass. Inside that folder were copies of my property deed, the fence permit, the harassment complaint logs, the HOA letters, and my attorney's cease and desist. I'd come prepared, not just to defend myself this time, but to go on offense. Karen had filed her complaint under the guise of community concern, which the county clerk told me could backfire hard if proven malicious. False reports wasted county resources, and there were penalties for that. Real, monetary ones. The woman at the counter, her name tag said Lydia, glanced through my folder, eyebrows raising higher with each page. "Oh wow," she said. "You've got quite the saga here." "You could call it that," I said. "Or a suburban power struggle starring one very dedicated villain." She smirked. "We get a few of those. Don't worry, we'll handle it properly. I'll flag her report for review." "Does that mean a fine?" I asked. "If her claim's found baseless, and from what I'm seeing it is, yes, potentially several $100s. Maybe more if she keeps it up." I thanked her, left my paperwork, and walked out feeling lighter than I had in months. Karen wanted to weaponize bureaucracy? I just handed her a loaded form with her name on it. That evening, I stopped by Jeff's house. He was grilling on his driveway, smoke rising into the golden dusk. "You're smiling," he said, flipping a burger. "That's never good news for Karen." "She filed a fake county report," I said. "I filed a real one about her fake one." He laughed so hard he nearly dropped the spatula. "You're playing chess while she's still chewing her checkers." "I'm just tired of the noise," I said. "If she gets fined, maybe she'll finally leave me alone." He shook his head. "You underestimate her stamina. Karen's not the retreating kind. She's the write a new rulebook kind." He wasn't wrong. 2 days later, a silver SUV rolled up to my fence again. Not Karen's Lexus. This one had Community Compliance Services painted on the side. A man in a neon vest got out, clipboard in hand. "Morning," he said. "I'm here to inspect a code concern." "Let me guess," I said. "Filed by someone whose name rhymes with Baron?" He chuckled. "I'm not supposed to say, but, yeah." We walked the perimeter. He took photos, checked measurements, made small talk. Finally, he said, "Everything's up to code. You're clean." I figured. "Mind leaving that in writing?" "Already done," he said, handing me a copy of his report. "You'll get the official file in the mail." And by the way, if she keeps calling us, we're forwarding it to the county attorney for nuisance reporting. That night, Karen's lights were on until nearly midnight. I could see her pacing through the blinds, phone in hand, probably composing her next manifesto. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. The following weekend, the fine arrived. I know because Karen made a spectacle of it. Around noon, she stomped down her driveway, letter in hand, shouting into her phone loud enough for half the street to hear. "This is an outrage. I was trying to protect property values," she barked. "You people punish responsibility and reward neglect." Then she slammed her car door and sped off toward the HOA office like she was driving to war. When she returned an hour later, she wasn't alone. 2 HOA board members trailed her, both visibly uncomfortable, like hostages at a press conference. She marched straight to my fence, the letter clutched in her hand. "You think you've won, don't you?" she said. "I think the county did," I replied. "They're good at math." "This community has had enough of your hostility," she snapped. "You're tearing us apart." "Karen, I built a fence," I said. "You built a narrative." She waved the fine in my face. "I will appeal this. I will have you removed for slander." "On what grounds?" "Property ownership." Her lips thinned. "You'll regret mocking me." "I've been regretting living near you since the day I moved here," I said, and walked away. That line traveled fast. By evening, I'd gotten 3 text messages from neighbors congratulating me for finally saying what everyone else wanted to. The next day, someone taped a note to my mailbox that simply read, "Team Fence." I had no idea who wrote it, but it made me grin. Karen, however, didn't find it amusing. The HOA Facebook page suddenly filled with posts about bullying, disrespect toward leadership, and the erosion of civility. She blamed a small but vocal group for fomenting hostility against the HOA board. Her allies chimed in, parroting the same talking points. But the tone was desperate now, defensive. The power balance had shifted, and she knew it. That's when she made her most desperate move yet. A week later, I woke up to the sound of engines. 3 landscaping trucks were parked along the cul-de-sac, workers unloading equipment. Karen stood at the center, clipboard in hand, wearing her reflective vest like she was leading a military operation. I walked outside, heart sinking. "What's this?" I asked. She didn't look at me. "Community Improvement Project. We're regrading the sidewalk verge for erosion control." I frowned. "That verge is my frontage. You don't have permission." She smirked. "Public easement. HOA approved." I grabbed my phone and called the county road department. The supervisor picked up on the second ring. "Sir," I said, "the HOA's tearing up the right-of-way in front of my property without permit." He sighed audibly. "Lakeview again? Give me 15 minutes." By the time the county truck arrived, Karen was directing the workers to dig a trench parallel to my fence. The supervisor stepped out, wearing aviator sunglasses and the weary expression of a man who's seen too much suburban nonsense. "Ma'am," he said, "this is not an authorized project. You need to stop." Karen turned on her charm. "We're just performing community maintenance. It's well within our rights." "It's not," he said flatly. "This section's under county jurisdiction. You're damaging public infrastructure." Karen blinked, mouth opening and closing. But the HOA manual doesn't override county law," he said. "You'll be billed for the repairs." The crew packed up within minutes, leaving behind a shallow scar of dirt and Karen's crumbling composure. She stormed home without another word. That evening, I noticed her Lexus gone for hours. When she returned, she looked drained. The next morning, I learned why. Jeff sent me a screenshot from the community group. Karen had temporarily stepped down as HOA president, citing health reasons. I almost felt bad. Almost. For 2 glorious weeks, peace reigned. No letters. No inspections. No nonsense. I spent my evenings working on the lot, trimming trees, planting a few more evergreens, and even setting up a small wooden bench overlooking the lake. It finally looked like the sanctuary I'd wanted it to be. Then, one quiet evening, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned, and there she was. No clipboard, no vest, no camera. Just Karen, standing by the fence, arms crossed. "Nice view," she said softly. "Thanks," I replied, cautious. She looked different, tired, less polished. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," she said. "You embarrassed me. I overreacted. That caught me off guard." I studied her face, looking for sarcasm, but there was none. Just exhaustion. "Karen," I said, "you could have just talked to me." "I don't talk," she said bitterly. "I enforce." We stood in silence for a long moment. Then she sighed. "I'm selling. Moving closer to my sister in Arizona. They can deal with the HOA headaches." Part of me wanted to gloat. Another part just felt relief. "Good luck," I said quietly. She nodded, then turned to leave, but paused halfway. "For what it's worth," she said, "that's a beautiful fence." When she drove away that night, I thought that was the end. But life rarely gives such clean finales. 2 weeks later, a "for sale" sign went up in her yard, and beneath it, a smaller sign that read, "Sale pending." I thought nothing of it until Jeff knocked on my door one evening, grinning like he'd just heard the punchline of a long joke. "You won't believe who bought Karen's house," he said. "Who?" He laughed. "The county's building inspector. The same guy she screamed at over your fence." I nearly dropped my coffee. "You're kidding." "Nope. He closed today. Said he got it below market because the HOA's reputation tanked." I couldn't help but laugh. After all the chaos, all the threats, all the noise, it ended not with revenge, but with irony. The inspector moved in quietly, planted new grass, and never once bothered anyone. The HOA stayed quiet too, humbled by fines, mockery, and dwindling credibility. And me? I finally built that small cabin I'd been planning. A simple wood structure, solar panels on the roof, a porch that faced the lake. Every morning I'd sit out there with my coffee, watching the sunrise spill over the fence Karen once hated so much. It wasn't just wood and nails anymore, it was a monument to boundaries, literal and metaphorical. 4 months afterward, neighbors would still tell the story. How the HOA president tried to claim an empty lot and got fenced out of her own power. And every time someone asked how I'd managed to stay calm through all of it, I gave the same answer. Because when you build something solid enough, even a Karen can't knock it down. But little did I know, her departure wasn't quite as final as it seemed. There was one last letter waiting for me, one she'd left behind with her signature on it, mailed weeks after she'd gone. And what that letter said would spark one last round of chaos I never saw coming. 3 weeks after Karen moved out, peace had become such a novelty that I almost didn't know what to do with it. No letters, no HOA emails, no clipboards appearing at dawn. I'd wake up, make coffee, and stare at the lake in silence. It was like living in a soundproof bubble after months of sirens. But peace never lasts long in neighborhoods where power used to thrive. One Tuesday morning, a thick manila envelope showed up in my mailbox. No return address, just my name in that tight, slanted handwriting I recognized instantly. Karen. I carried it inside, set it on the kitchen table, and stared at it for a long moment. Part of me didn't want to open it. Curiosity won anyway. Inside was a stack of papers and a short handwritten note. "You may think you've won, but you should know what's coming. I sold my property with the HOA transfer rights. The new owners have plans for community restoration. They're not as polite as I was. Good luck." I read it twice. Not as polite was saying something, considering she'd once threatened to bulldoze my fence with community funds. I flipped through the papers she'd included. They were HOA minutes, drafts of a motion she'd filed before resigning, labeled Proposed Expansion of HOA Jurisdiction, pending approval. At the bottom, someone had scrawled, "Motion carried 4-1. It hit me like a punch. Before leaving, Karen had quietly pushed through a proposal to expand the HOA's jurisdiction line, right up to include my property. I called the county zoning office immediately. Lydia answered, cheerful as always. You again, she said. What did she do this time? She filed a jurisdiction expansion before leaving, I said. Is that even legal? Lydia pulled up the record. Oh, I see it, but don't worry. It's provisional. It doesn't take effect until the new board submits verification to the county. Looks like they haven't done that yet. How long do they have? 30 days from the sale date, she said. That gave me less than a week. That night, I drove past Karen's old house. The lights were on, movers still unloading boxes. A black SUV sat in the driveway, and a tall man in a pressed polo was directing people where to carry furniture. He had that same look Karen had, the HOA posture, like every inch of concrete was under his command. I slowed down just enough to catch his name on a mailbox sticker, Dalton. Same last name. Her brother. I exhaled through my teeth. Of course. The next morning, I met him. He was standing at the end of my fence, clipboard in hand, examining the property line like he was auditing a crime scene. Morning, I said. He turned, flashed a practiced smile. You must be the gentleman with the fence. Guilty. I'm Mark Dalton, he said, shaking my hand with the confidence of someone who already assumed he was in charge. Karen's brother. I've taken over her position as HOA president. Condolences, I said. He chuckled, ignoring the jab. Karen mentioned you two had some disagreements. I'd call them boundary issues. He grinned, but there was calculation in his eyes. I prefer a clean slate. However, I do intend to finish some of her initiatives. She was very passionate about maintaining community standards. Passion's one word for it. He stepped closer to the fence, ran a hand along the cedar boards. Solid work. Shame it doesn't comply with our updated perimeter aesthetic guidelines. I raised an eyebrow. Updated? New revisions under review, he said smoothly. We'll be discussing them next week. You'll be getting a notice. I sighed. You're going to try the same thing she did. He smiled again, that cold HOA smile that meant watch me. By Friday the notice arrived. It was a copy of the same motion Karen had drafted, but this time signed and stamped. The HOA claimed temporary oversight of my parcel, pending county acknowledgement. They planned to host a community improvement event the following weekend on my lot. I called Lydia again. They can't do that, right? They shouldn't, she said carefully. But they filed for temporary recognition. Bureaucratically, it's messy. Until we finalize rejection, technically they can claim they're acting under review. So I can't stop them? Not immediately. But you can document everything. So that's what I did. Saturday morning I was ready. I'd set up 2 trail cameras along the fence line, one facing the street and one aimed at the lot. My phone was fully charged, my paperwork in a folder under my arm. At 9 a.m., the HOA army arrived. Mark led the charge, clipboard in hand, followed by 6 volunteers with rakes, wheelbarrows, and trash bags. Community restoration, their shirts red. I leaned against my truck, watching. Morning, folks. Big project today. Mark smiled. Just restoring neglected land. Neglected, huh? I said, motioning toward the perfectly trimmed grass. You sure you're in the right place? He didn't flinch. We're beautifying for the neighborhood's benefit. You're trespassing, I said calmly. He tilted his head. Technically, no. The HOA boundaries have not been approved, I interrupted. But go ahead. Every minute you're here is another minute of footage for the county's legal department. That made him pause. The volunteers shifted uneasily. You wouldn't actually press charges, he said finally. Try me. He looked around, saw the cameras, and his confidence cracked just slightly. Let's limit our work to the sidewalk area, he muttered. They raked for 15 awkward minutes, then packed up and left. I sent the footage straight to Lydia. Perfect, she said over the phone. That's textbook unlawful interference. By Monday, the county had officially voided their expansion request. My lot was safe again. But Mark wasn't done. 2 days later, I found a notice taped to my fence. Violation: unauthorized signage, unapproved fence color, lack of landscaping maintenance. It was printed on HOA letterhead, complete with his signature. I took a photo, emailed it to Lydia, and then walked to his house. He opened the door like he'd been expecting me. "Morning, Mark," I said, holding up the notice. "Cute stationery. Want to explain why you're filing HOA violations against non-members?" "It's about community standards," he said. "I'm simply ensuring consistency." "Consistency," I repeated. Interesting word for harassment. He crossed his arms. "Karen might have been too emotional about this. I'm not. I'm practical. You can fight me, sure, but that fence will come down eventually. So why not save us both the trouble and cooperate?" I stared at him. "You think persistence makes you right?" He smiled thinly. "It usually does." I stepped closer, low voice. "You're standing in your sister's shadow, trying to prove you're better at her game. But she lost. And so will you." His smile faded. "We'll see." Over the next week, the pattern repeated: letters, threats, passive-aggressive surveys. He even hired an independent assessor to take photos of my lot under the guise of insurance documentation. The man turned out to be one of the HOA's landscapers. I caught him in the act, took his photo, and sent it to the sheriff's office. That's when Mark slipped up. A week later, the county attorney contacted me directly. "Mr. Dalton's filed multiple false jurisdiction claims in your name," she said. "He's submitted maintenance expenses to be reimbursed from HOA funds for your property." I blinked. "He tried to bill the HOA for maintaining my land?" "Exactly," she said. "That's fraud." I sent her everything I had: photos, letters, timestamps, the whole paper trail from Karen to him. Within days, the HOA was under investigation for misuse of funds. Word spread fast. By the weekend, half the neighborhood knew the story. At the next board meeting, Mark tried to spin it as miscommunication. But when the county attorney herself walked in with a folder under her arm, the room went silent. She read off the list of complaints, fines, and violations, then added, "This board's actions constitute willful interference in private property matters." Mark's face turned the color of old brick. The motion to remove him as president passed unanimously. When the meeting ended, he stormed out, shoulders rigid. I was waiting outside. "Told you persistence isn't the same as being right," I said. He glared. "You think this ends here?" "No," I said. "It ends when you stop mistaking my patience for weakness." He didn't reply. Just got into his SUV and drove off. That night, the street was eerily quiet. For the first time in months, no letters, no threats, no HOA spies lurking at dawn. The next morning, a message from Lydia popped up. "County closed the investigation. HOA fined. Case closed. Congratulations, you're officially free." I went out to my lot, leaned on the fence, and watched the sunrise spill across the boards. The lake shimmered. The air smelled like cedar and wet grass. For the first time, it felt like mine again. But as I turned to leave, something caught my eye: a new envelope tucked under the gate, written in the same neat, slanted handwriting. It wasn't Karen's this time. It was Mark's. And the note inside was just 5 words: "You built it. I'll break it."